everyone. Welcome to the Performer's Guide. Get Your Act Together 21-Day Personal Challenge. We are on day 17, and today we are going to look at our habit loops. So it's week 3. We should be focusing on our habit tracking over the past few weeks and should have a little bit more of an idea of what our habits are. And so now this is an excellent time to look back reflectively and non-judgmentally at our habits over the course of the past few weeks and start to notice our loops, our habit loops. Because what habit loops come from routines. Our habits, if we do them over the course of a period of time, it's the opposite. If we do our routines over the course of a period of time, then it becomes a habit. And so we really want to focus on what have we been focusing on in our routines and which ones are solidifying into habits, which ones still need a little bit more focus, and maybe potentially spotting some areas for improvement on our habits. Yes? So we're going to talk about the habit loop, which I realize I probably could have put this part of this course in with just the habit tracking module. So I'll probably do that in the next round because it's all talking about habits. And so I think it's actually important to have all this right in the beginning. So I'm going to put this into the first module next time. But basically there's 3 parts to the habit loop. So we've been tracking our habits. But the habit isn't necessarily the beginning of the loop. It's usually a trigger. And so we've got a trigger. The trigger will cue a habit. And then there is a reward for the habit. And so it's a 3-part cycle. But then each part has 2 parts to it. And so we're going to go over the habit loop and just how to spot different triggers and how to embrace them or, navigate away from them, how to work our habits and how to reward ourselves for our habits. Yes. So the first thing we want to think about is our trigger. So it can also be called a cue. We can have light triggers, like just, ooh, I'm feeling a little triggered, all the way up to PTSD triggers. Right? Like I have complex PTSD, so I actually go to therapy to really work on my triggers, which is actually where I learned this module. Actually, it was in therapy, and I did this for myself, and it was just very helpful to look at what I'm doing in my life, what's causing it, how I'm reacting to it, and what the true benefit of it is, and start to mitigate that and map it out for a healthier way of living. So when we're talking about our triggers, we want to realize that there's 2 types of triggers. We can have an internal trigger, something that comes from the inside, or you can have an external trigger, something that maybe you're not fully in control of that triggers you to react in a certain way. So external stimuli can be any of the following. So it could be people, right? That's an external trigger. Maybe you go somewhere and there's somebody who triggers you. Have you ever felt that? Like maybe another performer, or maybe you feel triggered by a director or a way somebody is talking to you. That could be a trigger, which could trigger a response. And what is that response? Certain places can trigger you. This is true after traumatic events. If you go back to the place of the traumatic event, it'll trigger you. Same thing of, if you lived in a house for a long time that you had a bunch of unhealthy habits, moving to a new home has been said to help sort of be a catalyst to changing your habits because it's just a completely different location. Or perhaps going on vacation could be a trigger. And so it could be an external trigger such as a place. Then we've got sounds. For me, I get really triggered by sounds actually. I have auditory hypersensitivity, so anything really high pitched or anything very loud volumously can really hurt my ears. Also, just as performers, we're around really loud venues in general, and so sometimes if I have anxiety, really loud music can give me really bad anxiety. So I need to be aware of my sound triggers and try to take care of those. Smells. So they say that smell is actually the strongest, most linked to memory. So if you have a smell association with something, that could trigger something. Also, if somebody like smells bad, that could trigger something for you. If somebody's wearing a certain type of cologne, that could trigger some allergies, perhaps, something like that. There's all different ways that smells could trigger. Then you could have visual cues. Maybe let's say you're a smoker and then going into a store and seeing a cigarette advertisement that'll trigger you to want to smoke, perhaps. So just being aware of any kind of visual cues. And so that's why I like to rearrange and change up my house a lot, so that if there are visual cues for something that are triggering to me, it's kind of a Marie Kondo situation. If it doesn't spark joy, get it out, And so anything that's visually triggering that brings up a lot of emotions, maybe old costumes bring up emotions, maybe it was part of a company you don't have good associations with anymore. Maybe you want to get rid of that part of your catalog, or what are the visual cues you want to work on. Time of day. So let's say if you just got out of a relationship, maybe in the morning or in the evening might be more triggering because you're like used to snuggling with that person, let's say, or this is various reasons. A particular time of day might be more triggering to some type of effect more than another time of day. Then we've got seasons. So this is like seasonal depression. I get summertime seasonal depression, honestly. And so that's one of the reasons why I moved to Portland, is to mitigate that trigger for me. Because I was realizing that when I was too hot, I don't feel good. And I am emotionally unwell, physically just ugh. And I don't like being hot. I'm very sweaty naturally. And so I don't want to be sweatier. I'm less productive. And so I just realized that actually temperature was a big trigger for me. And every time the sun came out too intensely and directly, I'd be like, kind of like a vampire. So I was realizing, okay, I don't like summertime. Why don't I move away from San Diego, that's basically summer 9 months out of the year, to Portland that has seasons that work a little bit better for me. And then same with weather. So maybe you don't like snow and you live in a place that has a lot of snow, and that triggers anxiety or depression or some sort of mood, and you moving to a place that has better weather, or at least going to visit a place that has the kind of weather that you like, or just being aware of when the weather does affect you, how can you take care of yourself in those times. Then we've got internal triggers. So our internal triggers are not affected by anybody else. It's just caused by our own experience and cause different reactions. So first we've got memory. And so external can cause some internal, like smell can trigger a memory, which is an internal thing. Or you could just smell something and it smells really bad. It's just completely external, right? And so sometimes they're not necessarily just one or the other either. But memories can trigger a lot of emotions, right? And a lot of reactions. I think people also base their current judgment on what actions they should take based on what happened in the past. And that often can happen. So we want to think, well, okay, when am I thinking back and judging my actions based on memories instead of based on current facts right now? Then we've got physical sensations. This could be like hunger, pain, fatigue. Also, fabrics for me cause triggers. So when I'm traveling, like if I go on tour at all, I always bring the exact same blanket and pillow situation so that no matter where I am, I'm always at least having that touching my skin so it feels like something like home. And then I'm able to sleep better. So for me, if I have a bodily sensation that triggers me, I'll be totally alert and awake, even if it's just like the blanket. Emotions. So sometimes triggers can cause emotions, but sometimes emotions can be the trigger to cause you to act in a certain way. So maybe you're beyond your breaking point and you're just having, like, I have anxiety attacks. And so if I'm having a complete emotional breakdown, that could be a trigger to me not responding well to somebody else, or it could be a trigger to me withdrawing from people or to not doing the work that I need to do because I'm just having a total anxiety attack. So when are your emotions the trigger and when are triggers triggering your emotions? See, I mean, that's already one area where I can understand confusion and figuring out our triggers and behaviors. So then we've just got our internal dialogue, which is another reason why I have the no-no list. The way that we talk to ourselves is going to be a trigger. So if you're constantly talking negative to yourself, that's going to trigger you to not apply to a gig because you're talking negative, like, oh, I don't deserve that, and I'm not going to get to do it. So maybe that'll trigger you to inaction or something. And then dreams. So sometimes these could be your just sleeping dreams, and you could wake up and you could feel triggered in the morning. And that trigger could trigger you to be motivated to create a routine, or it could cause you to have anxiety about your gig tomorrow. There's all different ways that dreams could affect the way that we react and behave in a situation. So we just want to be aware of, sometimes they're just like in a weird mood. And I'm like, why am I in such a weird mood? And I'm like, oh, I had a weird dream last night. That's right. And then the other could be like a dream, a goal, like a dream that's so large that I'm so motivated to get to that dream that it triggers the way that I react. Maybe someone who's like a stepping stone person, like who tries to just topple on top of people to get into the next phase of their career, could be chasing a dream, and so we want to be aware of when we're doing that as well. Okay, so then we have the trigger, which leads into the habit. And so obviously we've been doing our habit tracking. And so you realize that we have our positive habits, the habits that we're trying to accomplish. And then we have our negative habits, the habits that we're trying to pull away from our routine. And so, just some examples of some positive habits could be regular exercise. So if you go to the gym, that's a physical environment where you, it's a location you can go that might motivate you to work out more versus just working out in your living room, right? And so maybe the gym could be the trigger that gets you to work out. Eating a healthy diet. So for me, just ordering the like imperfect foods type foods, or just like going and getting the food itself and actually only buying good food, that is the trigger to me eating healthy, because I don't even have cookies at the house. I only have like raw ingredients. So I have to make food if I want to eat. I can't just eat processed food because I don't buy it. And so the trigger is, for me, is having the food here. If I have the food here, I'm going to eat the food. And so for me to eat healthy food, I have to switch out what the trigger is. I have to get regular, like Whole Foods. Getting enough sleep. So if I'm having bad dreams, I'm not going to get good sleep, right? So maybe I need to take melatonin. And for me, that's my trigger to tell my body, like, okay, it's time to go to bed. which helps induce dreams, which could be positive or negative. They're quite intense dreams due to my PTSD. But having sleep cues, which we'll talk about in another video in more depth, having our sleep cues are triggers that will help induce good sleep. Then managing stress. So for me, having the house clean manages my stress. So a dirty house triggers stress. So a clean house triggers relaxation. Money. So for me, impulse buying is a trigger. So if impulse buying is a trigger, which causes me to spend money that I don't want to be spending, the way that I nip that trigger is by, instead of allowing myself to purchase anything I want when I go to a store, I only go to the store with the things on my list. And then if I see something I want later, then I put it onto the list for later. And then it can come onto my to-do list, my most important grocery list. And so that's how I've helped myself mitigate impulse purchases, with the caveat that I allow myself one impulse purchase if I desire during a trip. One. Kind of like a mom. I try to have that same kind of internal dialogue as a mom would with their child. Reading. Okay, so here's one where I've accidentally negatively triggered myself for reading. So I like to read when I go to bed. I read it helps me fall asleep. But therefore, reading triggers me to fall asleep. Because I've trained myself to think, okay, I'm reading, I'm falling asleep. And so I had to retrain myself to not read when I was going to bed. I read in the middle of the day. And so I had to change my routine to change the trigger cue in my mind so that I don't fall asleep when I'm reading. So I want to be able to read a lot. And so that was actually a problem in high school. I would read and fall asleep while I was reading because I trained myself to do that on accident. And then keeping a journal. So for me, keeping a journal is actually the trigger that helps me fall asleep. Because if I have too much on my mind, for me, it's either I have to pee subconsciously and I don't know it, or I have something on my mind that I need written down. Those are kind of usually the two reasons why I'm struggling to sleep. Or I'm just need melatonin, But for me, journaling is actually kind of the trigger too. And then all of these really help to build and maintain relationships. So that's the habit that we're really trying to do, right? Is building and maintaining healthy relationships. And we do that through watching our triggers, right? And realizing, oh shit, I'm triggered, and not just exploding on this person, but realizing, okay, I'm triggered. I have a habit of X. Let me take a step back and think about this for a second before I just, And so my New Year's resolution last year was actually to respond, not react, because I had been working on these triggers, and a trigger is a reaction, right? And a lot of responses that we do are reactions. It's like someone says something and you immediately respond, or you immediately react. But a response, take a step back, think about the response, say the response, and it sort of gives a break between the trigger habit is the pause for response. Okay. And so then the third part about this is realizing that we also have our negative habits, which is listed in our no-no list, right? And so for me, smoking was a big no habit that was a struggle for me. So I had to cut out the trigger of being around people who smoked for a while before I could comfortably be around people. I mean, still uncomfortably because it smells, but more comfortably be around people where I don't feel like I need to want to smoke when I'm around them. It's more of I'm just grossed out by it now, And so if you're quitting smoking, what is the trigger that triggers you to smoke? and start to nip that in the bud. Because oftentimes when we try to quit, as someone who's quit multiple things successfully, be it hard drugs, cigarettes, to heavy drinking, you name it, I've kind of done it all, honestly. And for me, being able to nip them in the butt was really figuring out what my triggers were to doing it, and then doing deep work on those triggers, inner work, and then the external triggers of cutting out certain people in certain situations where I felt like I might be tempted. And the same goes for drinking excessively, because unfortunately, drinking is a social sport in the world. So it's tough when you get social pressure of people wanting you to drink. And so even social pressure is a trigger, right? And for me, that's probably my number one trigger, because I don't really naturally want to drink that often. If I do, I'll have one. But if all my friends are like, come on, have more. Come on, Kristen. I'm like, all right, fine, fuck it, whatever. And people are like, I'll buy you one. And that's another trigger, is if people are so generous, they're like, oh, I'll buy you one. And so I'm such a natural gift receiver and gift giver that I'm like, okay. And then I'm like, oh shit, I'm too drunk actually. And so realizing that, okay, accepting drinks and social pressure are two of my triggers for drinking. So I try to limit instances where I go where that is possible, And again, overeating, that's a negative habit. And for me, I mitigate that by not having unhealthy food in the house and just straight up not buying it, and then allowing myself treats when I'm out, with a very intentional purchase of something that's yummy and semi-healthy, because it's like whole foods and not just processed, gross junk food. If you're a procrastinator, trying to figure out, and I'm going to have a whole procrastination module next week when we talk about that, when we talk about motivation, is figuring out what it is that's triggering the procrastination, because there's actually like multiple different reasons. There's like 10 different reasons, and we'll go over that next week about why one could feel procrastination. And so figuring out what that trigger is, and then really nipping it in the bud and just pushing past that to get over procrastination. And if you're talking negatively in your head, trying to figure out what it is that's causing that, is it just, and having good friends, honestly, who will point it out to you, being like, hey, you're doing that thing again, where you're talking negatively about yourself. Because I have friends that I love and care about, and I'm like, hey, you're doing that. Like, why are you second guessing yourself? Why are you, talking negatively or underestimating or undermining your own work before you've even done it? And if you're doing that, try to figure out like what it is. It's like, oh, my parents did that, or oh, it's because of this or that. It'll be something, and try to figure out what it is, If you're not showering and not taking care of yourself, what's up? What's the trigger there? Is it depression? For me, that's usually what it is. Is it just laziness, procrastination? Is it not knowing the skills needed? What is it? And why are you triggered into not taking care of yourself? Avoiding social interactions. So this is a big one for me. I noticed that. I'm like, oh, okay, wait. If I'm avoiding a lot of social interactions, what is it? Is it a health and safety issue? Am I socially burnt out? Is that the reason? Do I not like the people who are inviting me? Because I'm a naturally social person. So if I'm saying no to an invitation, then it's like, what's up with that? So for me right now, I've been saying no to a lot of social invitations because I'm just so focused on getting this written book part of the program done, that for me, that's the reason. It's like, okay, that is a positive reason, and but still something to go, okay, wait, I've said no like 10 times this week because of writing. Maybe I can say yes to this thing and I deserve a break. And sort of changing that trigger. And then, are you spending too much time on technology, right? No list, no doom scrolling. If you find yourself that you have been on your technology too much, what is the reason? Which app are you on? What's causing you to go there? What's triggering you? Maybe you're going there with the intention to work, but then something's triggering you and then you get lost and you're like now in a fight with somebody in a Facebook group about politics or something, you know? What are you spending your time on technology doing? What's triggering you to do that? And, how can you mitigate it? Okay, so we've got positive and negative habits, but we've also got positive and negative reinforcement. Okay, so the habit itself is the routine, right? The action. But the reinforcement is the reward. So you're either positively rewarding or negatively rewarding an action. And I think that there could be a misconception about negative reinforcement. That it's like being negative, like, no, don't do that, versus yes, do that, let's say in a parenting style. But it's actually the act of adding something to, like, adding a positive reward when something happens, or having something negative be removed when the action happens. So let's say that, we have positive reinforcement, which is I do something and then something positive happens, right? So let's say I'm walking on hot ground. So if I put shoes on, that's positive reinforcement to not, I don't feel pain, right? Because I put shoes on. But then a negative reinforcement would be to just not walk on the hot ground to begin with. If I don't do that, then my feet won't be hot. So that's kind of like a little bit of a difference between the two. So some ways to use positive reinforcement, one of which we're utilizing in this course, is setting goals, right? You set a goal and then you achieve the goal. Achieving the goal makes you feel positive and you're like, yes, I checked something off the list. And so that's a positive reinforcement, right? And then we have our negative reinforcement. So negative reinforcement would be taking a break so that I don't get burnt out, right? That's negative reinforcement. I'm removing myself from a situation so that I prevent something negative from happening. And so that's the 3 cycles. We've got the trigger, the habit, and the reward. And what we're going to do is list out what our triggers are and what do those triggers lead to, and what do we reward ourselves with that. And when I did this process, I had some things that I knew the reward for, like where I realized, like, oh, I reward myself for doing this. Then I'm like, okay, and then I sort of worked backwards. And then some of them I knew the habit, and I'm like, okay, I'm smoking. What is the trigger there? And what am I rewarding myself? And so you sort of start there. And then others are like, okay, I'm feeling triggered. What's happening here? Why? And then what am I about to do from the trigger? And then you sort of forward think and go, okay, I'm about to X, which is what I normally do. Okay, I should write that down. And then what happens after that? What usually happens after that? And sometimes the reward could be not even like a positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. It could just be bad, right? It could just be like a negative reward of, okay, I feel triggered, then I yell at somebody, and then I lose them as a friend. So maybe if I'm feeling triggered, I can find out why I'm feeling triggered, and then instead act in a different way, and then change the outcome of the situation. And so this can be great for all areas of your wheel of life, right? All areas of the habit tracking. What are you tracking? What is happening in each area? Really try to sit and think with each one, and then work your way forward or backward with whatever you have, and be like, okay, this is my habit. This is the trigger, and this is how I'm rewarding myself positively or negatively with it. So I'm excited to see what your habits are and how you are going to change the cycle. Once again, my name is Kristen Railing. This is the Performer's Guide, Get Your Act Together, 21-Day Personal Challenge. We're on day 17, the habit loop. Have a wonderful day. Bye.